Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast, where we explore the ideas, insights, and research shaping society and the world of business. I am Deepak, your host from India. We are honored to welcome Dr. Nirajana Mishra for a timely discussion on her research discussing money with the one you love, how financial stress influences couples' financial communication. From stress and avoidance to openness and teamwork, we examine what drives financial communication between couples and why it matters. Dr. Nirajana Mishra is an assistant professor of marketing at Northeastern University's D. Amore McKim School of Business. A consumer psychologist by training, she studies how people navigate two increasingly intertwined forces in everyday life, technology and money, and how both shape consumer experiences and decisions. Her work spans two core streams: understanding how emerging technologies change consumption, like and the feelings, frictions, and behavior that follow, and examining how consumers form judgments about money. Originally from South Asia, she is also interested in extending her research into field settings across the region, bringing a culturally grounded lens to consumer behavior. Before academia, Dr. Mishra built industry experiences at American Express, Citibank, and GE Capital, where she led digital transformations of consumer products and processes. She takes an interdisciplinary method forward approach to research, combining rigorous experimentation, including online studies and randomized control trials in the field, with deep market understanding drawn from sources such as secondary datasets and consumer reviews. She is also continuing research fellow at the Yale Center of Customer Insights, Yale School of Management. It's time to dive right in. Let's give a big welcome to Dr. Nirajana Mishra, our guest for today's episode. Dr. Mishra, we sincerely appreciate your kind acceptance of our invitation. It's an honor and privilege to host you today.
Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure joining you today. And again, thank you for such a great introduction. I don't think I myself could have done what you said in introducing me. So thank you once again.
Thank you,
And I'm really
Professor.
excited to be on this podcast and discuss our paper.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, your paper shows that high financial stress makes people less likely to talk about money with their partner because
Mhm.
they anticipated conflict. What does anticipated conflict look like in real couples? And how did you capture it across your studies?
So before I dive into details about what anticipated conflict means, what I'm going to do is give your listeners a context for what the paper is about. So a lot of past academic literature that exists has shown that it's important for couples to engage with each other on topics related to money. And why is it important? Because it does two things. It improves financial management of the household. So couples can spend more responsibly. They also manage debt better. And it is also good for their relationship satisfaction. So, this is what exists in the academic literature. Now, what we wanted to do was to step a little back and see what are the factors that could hamper this activity of communicating to your partner on topics related to money. And we identified one such factor to be financial stress. So, what we show is if you are financially stressed, or if a consumer is financially stressed, then they are less willing to talk to their partner. And these are either married consumers or consumers who are in a relationship. And if they are stressed, they are less willing to talk to their partner about topics related to money. And why are they less willing? Because they anticipate conflict. So that's where the term anticipated conflict creeps in or gets into our paper, because we use it as a mechanism to explain our effect of reduced financial communication. Now, what do we exactly mean by it? So, if you have been in any relationship, I will. I'll try to make it more tangible for our listeners. Sometimes we are thinking that we must talk to our partner about something, but we hesitate. And that hesitation is not because there is an actual conflict or there is an actual fight. That hesitation is just because there is an expectation that this might not go the way as we want it to go. So we might get upset with each other. We might not see eye to eye. We might start talking about each other's opposing attitudes towards certain things, and in our case, towards money. And this expectation of a potential conflict is what we call anticipated conflict. And the way we capture it in our studies is exactly by measuring these items which I mentioned, that we ask respondents to tell us whether they expect to see eye to eye with their partner when engaging on such topics. And in our case, the topic is financial topic, whether they think that they would get upset, whether they try to change their partner's attitudes, whether they feel annoyed with their partner's habits, money habits in our case. So these are some of the items that we use to capture this construct of anticipated conflict.
Professor, across 8 studies with a large total sample, you find a consistent stress and less communication pattern. Which
Mhm.
study design gave you the clearest evidence for the underlying why mechanism and why?
So in this paper, we have 8 studies, and some of my favorite studies are actually not in the main manuscript, but in the web appendix. But let me talk about the 2 studies that did give us a very clear empirical evidence of our effect. So, what we are saying is financial stress makes couples less willing to talk to their partner about topics related to money. Now, in this study, what we did is we recruited samples on online platforms. So we use, as a researcher in consumer behavior, we often use some online platforms called Cloud Research or Prolific to recruit participants. So we recruited these participants and then we randomly assigned them to 2 conditions. In one condition, one group of participants had to write about a day when they were feeling on top of their finances. And in the other condition, they had to write about a day when they were not feeling on top of their finances. And they had to write, say, 2 or 3, 4 or 5 sentences. And in both of these conditions, participants did this writing exercise. Now, what this writing exercise does is it evokes the feelings of financial stress. And what is interesting is later on, when we saw the objective income between these two samples was not statistically different, but the writing exercise did evoke differential levels of financial stress. So participants that wrote about a day when they were not on top of their finances, they felt more financially stressed than participants who wrote about a day when they felt on top of their finances. So they did that exercise. Then we asked them how much conflict they anticipated. So they had to respond to 7 or 8 items related to anticipated conflict. And then we asked them how likely were they to communicate to their partner on topics related to money. So of course, we asked them likelihood of communication. But we wanted to make this measure more holistic. So that was one item. Then there was this other item, that are you willing to talk even though you might disagree with your partner? And often financial communication involves couples, creating financial goals together, discussing them together, and then working towards them. So we also included those items in our financial communication scale. So our financial communication scale was holistic in the sense that it captured communication when participants knew that they would disagree with each other, and this whole process of creating, discussing, and working towards financial goals. And what we found is that the sample of participants who wrote about the day when they were not on top of their finances, they expected more conflict. Because they expected more conflict, they were less willing to speak to their spouses compared to the sample of participants who had written about a day when they felt on top of their finances. And we made sure that all these participants were married and were living together with their spouses. So this was one study. The other study, we went even a step further. So not only we experimentally manipulated financial stress, as we did in the study that I just described, we also experimentally manipulated anticipated conflict. So how we did that, we again, so here in this case, we randomly assigned participants to four conditions. So one was low financial stress, high financial stress. In the high financial stress, they had to write about a day when they were not on top of their finances. In the low financial stress, they had to write about a day when they were on top of their finances, when they felt on top of their finances. And then to manipulate high conflict versus low conflict, we told them that they had a big expense coming up, but they did not anticipate any conflict because they had goals that they shared. So they had similar financial goals, they had joint financial goals. And in the other condition where we wanted to make the conflict higher, we told them that they had a big expense coming up, but they anticipated conflict because they did not have the shared or the joint goals. And again, we saw that in the condition where there was no anticipated conflict, so they had the big expense coming up, but because they had a shared financial goal, there was no conflict. In that case, there were no significant differences between whether they felt financially stressed or they did not feel as much financial stress. We only saw the effect when we made the anticipated conflict salient, in the sense where we had told the participants that, hey, you have a big financial purchase coming up, you anticipate a conflict because you're not aligned together on that financial goal. That's when we saw that participants who were highly financially stressed, in that they wrote about when they did not feel on top of their finances, they were less willing to communicate with their partner compared to participants who felt not as financially stressed. So these two studies, I feel like really clearly show our effects because we experimentally manipulate both financial stress, which is our independent variable, and also we experimentally manipulate our anticipated conflict, which is our mediator. So these two is what I would pick as the studies that cleanly show our effect empirically.
Dr. Mishra, how do you distinguish I am stressed about money from
Mhm.
we have money disagreements? And what did your data suggest about how those two experiences interact?
Hmm. So, as I referred earlier, like when we are talking about financial stress, of course, it is related to the objective income that the participant has, the annual income. But what we try to do experimentally is kind of tap the feeling of subjective financial stress. And that's why when I was talking about the study, I mentioned that the objective income was the same. So these participants in the two samples were almost earning the same annual income. These are, of course, self-reported income. So that is the caveat that I would put there. But we were still able to get differential levels of financial stress because financial stress is an internal state of a consumer's mind where they might feel that they are not able to control their finances. They worry about current money management activities, and they feel that they are running behind finances. So, two people might be earning the same amount of income, yearly income, but these feelings might vary. And that's what financial stress as a construct we use in the paper. But financial disagreement is more interrelational. So when I was talking about financial conflict, and that's the construct that taps into financial disagreement as well, it is more relative to another person. So then it would be things like, do I feel that I have the same attitudes towards money as my partner? Do I want to change my partner's habit and so on? And what we find in the paper is when there is financial stress, people's cognitive abilities are depleted to a certain extent. And that's why they feel that they might not be able to manage certain conflict as well as when the financial stress is low. So there might be disagreements, but if I feel good about my finances, I feel like I can handle them. I can handle the disagreements that I have with my spouse related to money. But if I feel financially stressed, then financial stress kind of amplifies those disagreements. So that's the sort of interaction that we found in our paper.
Professor, your findings say the effect weakens when people don't anticipate a conflict.
Mhm.
What reduces that anticipation in the first place? Relationship dynamics, past conflict history, or how the conversation is framed?
Um, so of course, the part, how the relationship is, how much they are satisfied with the relationship. I'm sure like these variables probably do have an effect on how much conflict people are expecting. But what we find is one thing that definitely influences is how the conflict is perceived. Now, to tease that out, we took advantage of the literature that exists in couples relationship. And if we see that literature talks about conflict in two ways. So people can perceive conflict as being perpetual. In that case, oh, this is a recurring fight between us. We are never going to settle. And they do that because there's this inherent tendency to focus on on differences, on the fundamental core differences. So, in our context, it would be differences like I'm a saver, you are a spender, or I'm more risk averse in my investment philosophy, you are more risk seeking. And because couples tend to focus on these disparities or these fundamental differences, they perceive conflict to be perpetual, that we are never going to reach any agreement. But conflicts can also be perceived as solvable. So when you see it as a specific problem that is to be solved by both the couple partners. Now, what's interesting is that when we go to the couple literature, they say that about 69 to 70% of the conflicts are perceived as perpetual. So the spontaneous belief or the belief of people is that any conflict is perpetual. And how we tried to reduce conflict in this project or in this paper is to change the framing of how the conflict is perceived. So spontaneously, it's perceived as perpetual, but what can we do to frame it as a solvable problem or as a solvable conflict?
Professor, the paper highlights a powerful reframe. Seeing
Mhm.
conflict as solvable rather than perpetual increases willingness to engage. What
Mhm.
specific interventions or prompt work best to shift people into a solvable mindset?
Yeah, so this is interesting because we didn't do any intensive intervention. It wasn't that we tried to change the financial situation of couples. We didn't do any therapy. We didn't give them any financial education curriculum. What we did was a very simple intervention, which was that changing the framing of the problem, making it feel more solvable rather than making it feel perpetual. Should I go into details of how we did that in the experiment, or is that your
Yes,
next
please,
question?
please
Okay,
go ahead.
okay.
Yeah.
So in the paper, what we did is, in this case, we took a sample of participants and then we assigned them into three groups. Now, in all the three groups, the participants, and these are all married participants. So across all our studies in the paper, we or participants who've been in a relationship for more than 6 months. So we have participants in three groups. All of them are reading about Alex and Taylor. Alex and Taylor are a couple and they have differing attitudes towards money. So Alex is a spender and Taylor is a saver. And they are planning to go on a vacation. And suddenly they face a financial shock in terms of an expense that they had not anticipated. So they have a huge leak in their kitchen, there is water damage, and now the kitchen needs to be repaired. So Alex, who is a spender, is thinking, hey, this is a good opportunity. I anyway wanted to renovate my kitchen. So now when we are repairing the kitchen, let's bring in the most premium kitchen cabinets. Now Taylor, who is a saver, is thinking, hey, this is a sudden expense. We hadn't planned for it. So actually, let's cancel our vacation so that we can really balance the budget. Now, this is the situation that participants in all the groups read. And we simply change the way the story ends in order to frame the conflict as either solvable, perpetual, or in the third condition, which we call the control condition, we do not change the framing of the conflict at all. And we do that because we want to see how do people spontaneously perceive conflict if we don't frame it in any explicit way. So, in the condition where we want to frame conflict as perpetual, we say that Alex is the spender, she wants premium cabinets, Taylor is the saver, Taylor wants to cancel the vacation and go for affordable cabinets. And they disagree, they have different attitudes, and the conflict goes on. Now, in the condition where we want to show that conflict is solvable, we say that okay, both of them decide that they have this specific problem, they are looking for a solution, they make a compromise. Taylor decides to go on the vacation, and Alex settles on an affordable cabinet. And in the control condition, we don't talk, we don't frame the conflict in any specific way. And then we ask people that, okay, now imagine that you had a similar situation, write about that, because we want to get them immersed into that specific scenario. So they do the writing task. And then we say, you have a big expense coming up. You really need to talk to your partner. How willing would you be to talk to your partner? And what we find was something very interesting. So, of course, people that who were assigned to the perpetual conflict condition, in which they saw that the financial conflict between Alex and Taylor was not resolved, those people were less likely to communicate compared to the people who saw that the conflict between Alex and Taylor was resolved. But what was interesting is there was no difference between the perpetual and the control condition, meaning that people spontaneously think of conflict as being perpetual. They spontaneously think that disagreements are damaging. So that was also I also like the study because it was a very clean illustrations of the beliefs of people regarding financial conflict. And of course, it showed that if you change the framing of the conflict to be solvable, then that does increase the willingness of people to talk to their partner, even in conditions of financial stress.
Professor, in the experiment described publicly,
Mhm.
participants read a couple story that ended either with compromise or ongoing conflict.
Yeah, yeah.
What does that tell us about how small scripts or narratives can change real behavior at home?
Yeah, so as I just described that experiment, that it was a very simple intervention, and surprisingly, it did show effects on couples' willingness to talk to each other about issues related to money in terms of financial stress. So, yes, there are these small changes in narratives that couples can make. And I would say perhaps doing like three things. So, being more collaborative. So, saying like, let us work together on it. And then maybe anchoring conversations in the context of shared financial goals or joint financial goals. So, if you're going through financial stress, you have the joint financial goal as a couple in a household to reduce financial stress. So, maybe begin the communication from that standpoint. And the third thing is to frame the conflict as being solvable. So this is a specific problem. I know it is hard. I know we have our disagreements, but how can we work together to solve these specific problems? So overall, like being collaborative, having shared financial goals, and thinking of conflicts as being solvable. I think these changes would be a good start.
Professor, many couples avoid money talks because they expect them to become a war zone.
Hmm.
Based on your research, what are the two, three language choices or conversation setups that lower the temperature before numbers even enter the discussion?
Yeah, so probably like I think I'm going to be repetitive from what I said earlier. But like before even we go into a conversation, we have this mental imagery of of how the conversation is going to look like. So if as a couple, I'm thinking that, oh, this is going to be about our differential habits towards money, that person is going to say, you're a spender, you're not a saver, you don't know how to save, we are never going to agree, this is going to be a recurring fight, then I'm never going to lean in towards that financial communication. But if the mental imagery in my head of the communication is, hey, let's think of it together. Uh, let's think of joint financial goals. Then maybe couples can lean into financial communication more. So the intent is to not see financial conflict as a contest where one is a winner versus one is a loser, and not to prove your point, but to go in with this motivation to solve a specific problem. I think that's what I can say confidently based on what we see in our paper.
Professor, what practical implications do you see for financial advisors, therapists,
Mhm.
or even budgeting apps, especially around using more non-judgmental, solvable language to encourage couples to talk?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about budgeting apps because when we were actually doing this project, we did go through budgeting apps, and especially the budgeting apps that were geared towards couples. And one thing that we saw was that most of the language was towards tracking each other's spending. So what we felt is that, saying that track each other's spending feels a more judgmental. And maybe if we have different habits of spending less or saving less, then even more, some people could perceive it that the partner is accusing me. So, one better way could be to say, instead of saying track your spending, it could be to say share your spending. So, again, putting it in the context of having joint goals and shared goals, and also making, as you said, making the language more non judgmental. So, that could be one implication for budgeting apps, especially those that are geared towards couples. For financial therapists, I don't think we tested this in our paper. But one idea could be if they could normalize financial stress. I think we talk about it as future directions in our paper, but we definitely don't test it. But I would be curious to see what happens when therapists normalize financial stress, because what that would do is to frame the conflict as being solvable. So the therapist can say, a lot of couples go through financial stress. There are these conflicts that you will have, but these are solvable. You need to work together. We have a plan. So rather than focusing on these inherent disparities in couples' attitudes towards money, their differences in how they perceive risk, investment, and growth, making them focus on a specific problem and helping them reach a compromise, even though they might have disagreements. So that could be something that financial therapists could do. And like overall, I would say we all know that it is important for couples to talk to each other, to engage with each other on topics related to money. And what our paper seems to be telling is to change, and couples don't do it because they expect conflict. And what our paper seems to be telling is to change the way conflict is perceived. So it's not so what we conclude that it's not that when they have financial stress, the actual amount of conflict increases. What we are saying is couples anticipate there to be a conflict, and we can reduce this anticipation by showing that even though there is disagreement, it is solvable. So to somehow change the belief that disagreement is always harmful, disagreement is always destructive, to making them feel that disagreements can be solvable, that is a way forward for making couples talk more on matters related to money.
Professor, your work links financial communication not only to financial well-being, but also to
Hmm.
relationship satisfaction. What are
Yeah.
the downstream relationship costs to avoidance that people typically underestimate?
Yeah, so we don't do it in our paper. And as I talked in the beginning, there is a lot of academic literature that shows that financial communication between couples has two positive advantages. One is that it definitely makes them more financially prudent. They are better on savings, they are better at debt management. But the other is also that it makes them more uh, happy as a couple. They feel more satisfied in their relationship. So the disadvantage would be that there are probably being more financially inefficient if they are not talking to each other about money. So that is one disadvantage. But the other is that they are also probably losing out opportunities to work as teammates with each other towards a certain goal. And if you do that, it also increases how satisfied you feel in a relationship. So those would be like the two obvious disadvantages of not engaging in money conversations with each other.
Professor Mishra, to conclude this episode, I would like to
Mhm.
end with one final question. If a listener relates to the I am stressed, so I shut down pattern, what's one evidence aligned first step they can take this week to start a money conversation without triggering the conflict they fear?
So, if a listener feels that, I'm financially stressed and I'm stuck and I probably should avoid talking to my partner about money, I would just ask them to reframe how they are thinking. Yes, they are financially stressed. Yes, they are stuck. But the framing should be, let me go and talk because we can work together on this problem. This is something that is solvable. Focus on a specific problem that they are trying to solve. So the core idea is when you think of conflict or disagreements as being solvable, starting from the point of being collaborative, rather than thinking of them as adversarial, as I said, like as a contest where one is a winner or a loser, and not thinking of them as perpetual. Like I think that is the start. That is where we will begin to see the changes.
Professor Mishra, thank you again for joining us and sharing your research and insights so clearly today. It was especially valuable to unpack how financial stress can reduce couples' willingness to talk about money because they anticipate conflict, and how reframing conflict as solvable can make those conversations more likely and more constructive. For our listeners, if there is a one takeaway, if this avoiding the conversation often increasing the strain, but approaching money talk as a problem you can solve together can change the tone and the outcome. Professor Mishra, we are grateful for your time and contribution, and we hope to welcome back again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deepak, and thank you for summarizing the conclusion of our paper in such an eloquent way. I appreciate your time, and it was great talking to you. And hopefully, your listeners enjoy when they listen to our conversation.
Thank you, Professor.